from the Signature Bank Studios.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. An important moment with respect to COVID and the vaccines. The Daily Mail reporting, for years, thousands of Americans who suffered debilitating side effects after getting the COVID vaccine were told there was no evidence the shot was linked. But that has now changed. A team from Yale University, known for their rigorous work, revealed the mRNA shots can cause a previously unknown condition known as, quote, post-vaccination syndrome, PVS. So listen up if this is you. The syndrome appears to cause brain fog, dizziness, tinnitus, extreme fatigue, and biological changes to patients' immune systems. Dr. Akiko Awasaki, the lead researcher behind the paper from the Yale researchers, told the Daily Mail she understands her findings could be seen as controversial, but she wants patients to know her team will keep studying to bring them better transparency and safer vaccines. She thinks this is actually a paradigm-shifting moment, and they're going to do larger studies. She said people with PVS have felt dismissed and ignored because PVS is not a medically recognized condition. I believe that rigorous scientific research will lead to better diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of PVS. Such research will also lead to better transparency and safer vaccines. She is the director of the Center for Infection and Immunity at the Yale School of Medicine. I'm not saying she's science, like Dr. Fauci is science, but she is a scientist.
Is she going to walk away a millionaire like Fauci?
COVID, according to CDC, CDC is still recommending COVID vaccines, especially for those who are elderly or immunocompromised.
This is what, shot 19 now, I think?
I've lost track and lost interest, frankly, a long time ago. And then the Daily Mail profiles actual Americans, actual human beings who have these afflictions that the Yale researchers described or worse, that they believe the proximate cause was the mandatory vaccine. I know he wants to talk about DOGE, and so do we, but our next guest was such an important voice during the lockdowns and the whole COVID saga, combating the COVIDians, misinformation, and authoritarian gambits, that we need to address this with him as well. Jeffrey Tucker is the founder and president of the Brownstone Institute and the author of Liberty or Lockdown. Jeff Tucker, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it. Sure.
I'm so embarrassed. Who is the woman you mentioned?
She is her name is Isasaki. Dr. Iwasaki, is her name. Yale. She's an immunologist at Yale University, and she leads the team there. Center for Infection and Immunity at Yale School of Medicine.
Yeah. And what's her connection to the CDC?
She doesn't have a connection to the CDC.
Yeah. Well, so we've got a problem. I mean, poor Bobby is now at a HHS, and I don't know. He's overseeing like 80,000 employees or something like that. Which is to say, about 79,000 people who hate his guts and are trying to undermine him. So I don't even know what his life is like, but I can tell you this. In the week before the inauguration and in the days before, in the weeks after the inauguration, before RFK's confirmation, the bureaucrats were busy bees. And they were doing terrible things, throwing around, $600 million to Moderna, for a new mRNA bird flu shot. The CDC was authorizing new PCR tests for chickens. The Department of Agriculture. HHS itself released a document for the first ever U.S. World Health Organization cooperation on an agenda called One Health, which is this theory that your daughter and a rat are of equal value. And
That's nice.
And let me just say something about that point about One Health, which is really coming for your pets. You know, this is bad stuff. The HHS released that document on January 10th, okay? So you could say, well, that was the old regime, right? But when you click on the link, it gives you a PDF. Well, if you look at the metadata of the PDF, the last edit was on February 13th, okay? And that thing has specific author names that are currently employed by the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Interior, and then also the CDC itself. So we know for sure that this is, insubordination, right? And we're able to prove that with the metadata of the document. So it's a question at this point, to what extent does RFK have to just purge the place, like clean it out, fire tens of thousands of employees and that sort of thing, in order to right this ship? It's not entirely clear, or how he can do that. And
it's not just RFK. I mean, obviously you have Makari at FDA, you have Bhattacharya at NIH. And these are medical doctors too, and so they obviously experienced the worst of the worst during COVID from the medical community and from the public health community, and so I mean I would think that they would be riding point on some of this, in addition to staying abreast of research like that coming out of Yale with respect to post-vaccination syndrome.
Yeah, for sure. And there's no question about their agenda and their long-term plans, and that we're going to get some of their way. But they're battling a bureaucratic beast of such immense power, not just government power, but industrial power. I mean, all these programs have industrial partners. And so they're confronting an amazing machine. Marty and Jay's confirmation hearings are next week. They're going to be harassed within an inch of their life. Yeah. And I'm sure my name is going to come up repeatedly, right, in these hearings. So I'm bracing myself for that.
Well, I mean, thankfully, Marty and Jay Bhattacharya are about 4 standard deviations smarter than anybody that's going to be questioning them, so I think they'll hold up quite well.
That is true, but, part of the problem with these confirmation hearings, as you saw with RFK, is, I mean, he's the smartest person in the room easily, but there's a lot of horse trading that has to go on behind the scenes. It won't surprise you to learn that these politicians don't give their votes for nothing, right? Nor do they give it based on merits. Washington is a city of payola and power. So that's the issue.
But let me ask you something sort of more globally, because this seems like a reset. I saw, I'm sure you did too, last week at an event at the White House. Trump introduces Albert Bola, the head of Pfizer, to mostly boos in the room, which was pretty entertaining. Yesterday we have the announcement from Dave Ricks, the CEO of Eli Lilly, that Eli Lilly is investing $27 billion in new sites in America. And so to the point you were making about sort of industrial partners with respect to the public health bureaucracy, how should we conceive big pharma, and what sort of program should the public health agencies in this administration lay down with big pharmaceutical companies in terms of their relationship with the government? I mean, you'll hear from Bhattacharya, you'll hear from Macri, you agree, I'm sure as well. There's obviously a lot of value that pharma companies provide, but it's that relationship, so that when they do get far afield, when the incentives are not aligned with the American public health interests, what that relationship is like, and there needs to be, I think, a new framework for considering that.
We have to eliminate the liability protections for big pharma, all of them, especially those that pertain to so-called vaccines. that will pretty much solve the problem, but that's the biggest nightmare. When we talk about big pharma, we need to remember something from the last 5 years. In the whole history, recorded history of the human race, there's only been one industry powerful enough to push a button to shut down the entire global economy at once for its industrial profits and power, and that is big pharma. I mean, that's bigger than East India Tea Company. That's bigger than anything else in human history. So the Trump administration is confronting this in a setting in which Trump has a ambiguous relationship with big pharma. On one hand, he's taken a lot of credit for Operation Warp Speed, but we have to remember that his version of Warp Speed was not, produce a poison shot that's going to hurt you and mandate it, right? And his version of Warp Speed was, let's find a fix for COVID. And his first intuition was the right one. Let's solve this with off-the-shelf therapeutics like hydroxychloroquine. Right. And then the industry got busy producing genuinely fake studies with authors that made up data that were printed in prestigious medical journals, all saying hydroxychloroquine was terrible. So they took it off the market to prepare the terrain for this mRNA vaccine that Trump also later said took credit for. But I think that was a mistake. But here's the problem. He's got big pharma crawling all over him right now with donations, with pressure, and, all sorts of things that he's dealing with these people. And I have a fantasy about this Burla situation that you mentioned the other day. And I'm not sure it's true, but he was hanging around with Trump that day, and it's possible that he started getting on Trump's nerves, demanding this, demanding that. And Trump says, hey, listen, lovely talking to you. I've got to go to a reception right now for Black History Month. How would you like to join me, and I'll introduce you? And Burla, being an idiot and naive, he goes, oh, okay, I'll come. I'd love to be introduced.
Maybe. And
Trump knew exactly what was going to happen. And it made no sense, right? He said, a celebration for Black History Month, he's introducing, this guy and this guy and this guy. And he goes, and also, the great businessman Albert Burla of Pfizer. And everybody in the room goes, oh! And Trump just kind of laughs. Now, if you think about from Trump's point of view, and by the way, this interpretation comes from Walter Kim, the great novelist, who was watching this at the time. And he said, if you don't understand this, you don't understand Trump. What Trump needed to be able to do is to go back to Albert Burla and say, listen, Albert, you're a good friend, you're a good man, I really like you, but I got a problem at my base. They don't like you. They don't like you.
It's a brilliant Trump move. But let's go back to something that you just said about the fake studies on hydroxychloroquine. Yeah. I want names, like who produced these fake studies. Because I remember getting hydroxychloroquine, but I had to go to an organic pharmacy.
Yeah.
And there's only 4 in the Chicagoland area, and you've got to go at certain times and getting it. And I just felt like I was buying illegal drugs.
Yeah. Well, I was in the same situation. I mean, my doctor prescribed to me, ivermectin, and
me too.
And I couldn't get it. And look, just so you understand, I'm not some sort of lifetime rage, machine against pharma. My doctor said to me, he goes, "What's your pharmacy?" And I said, "Oh, I like that CVS down the street." He goes, he said, "CVS, Walgreens, they're part of the system." And I said, "The system? What system?" He goes, the system. I said, well, are you telling me that this drugstore is not going to give me a prescription?
Nope.
He said, no way. I need a family pharmacy. I have to tell you, at that time I thought, wow, there's something wrong with this guy. He actually thinks these wonderful little retail merchants are part of some sort of weird machine. Well, that naive me, of course they wouldn't give it to me, and neither would the family pharmacies because they too were under pressure. Yeah, I ended up having to get some, reveal on the radio here, get some from a FedEx to me from New York that had been imported from India. Gray market stuff. Crazy, right?
I know, and it worked too. Ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. I was better within hours.
Oh, yeah, ivermectin was great. Now, on those fake studies, again, I'm a little disturbed that people don't. I don't think people understand what happened here, but it's a scandal. So these studies were all promoted, of course, by Moderna and Pfizer and their little cutouts and third-party NGO, money hiding operations, and they paid a bunch of researchers. And they, over a series of studies, they literally made up data. I mean, just like they never left their laptops, generated fake studies involving, 10,000 patients here, 100,000 patients there. It didn't work. There's not a word that was true. I think one of them was called Surgisphere, and that was revealed to be a fake last year. A complete fake from first word to last. And then just 2 weeks ago, another big hydroxychloroquine study came out. Was withdrawn from publication from the Lancet, okay, the world's most prestigious medical journal, the Lancet. Another completely fake study on hydroxychloroquine. Completely fake. They made up all the numbers, made up the trials, made up the results, made up everything. And so that was withdrawn from publication. And how did we find out they're fake? A simple query to the authors, let me see your data. And they never produced it. And it turns out they're entirely fake. So I'm looking back at those days, and you remember these days. People like Harvey Risch at Yale University was out there saying, hydroxychloroquine, I'm sorry, it works. We have hundreds of years of experience with this stuff. This is why British soldiers always drank gin and tonics, right? Because of the chloroquine in the tonic. It protects against all kinds of infectious diseases,
I drink gin, too, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it's me, too.
Do you keep the tonic in it,
story.
Dan, or do you keep it straight?
Yeah.
It's all for health. But anyway, so and then the reporters, and he's a fancy guy, from Yale or whatever, and an epidemiologist who knows all this stuff. And he's over there on TV saying this stuff. And the reporters would say, well, what do you have to say about this very important study that contradicts everything you're saying? It was published in the Lancet. It was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And, he at the time was saying things like, I don't think that study is correct. There's something wrong with it. It's not well constructed. There's something that just is not right about it. Okay, so here's this Yale tenured professor of epidemiology who knows this world really well, raising questions about the study, but it's not a decisive comment, right? I mean, just to have some fancy guy on TV going, something just doesn't strike me right about that. Okay, so if you're a listener, you think, well, who am I going to believe? The Journal of the American Medical Association or some guy on TV who has an intuition that's not quite right?
Well, right. I mean, and they jackpot Risch with a study that he hasn't had time to sort of try to replicate or verify. So of course he's going as a scientist, he's going to say, I don't know, it doesn't strike me as right, but I've got to do my due diligence in order to comment intelligently on that. We had no time for intelligent commentary or due diligence. We had to rush past all of that phase. But this speaks to this op-ed that you wrote in the journal too, with this conversation we're having, and basically your position is it's sort of DOGE or bust with respect to ever trying to grapple with the administrative state.
Sure.
And it's particularly important in public health because of the phenomenon of agency capture. And nowhere has agency capture been more pronounced than with Big Pharma capturing the public health agencies.
That's right. And we don't know that much about it. We know a little bit about it, but not as much as we're supposed to know, partially because, the system has been kept from prying eyes since 1939. And this is a startling thing to me. Do you remember the night of the inauguration when Trump, took the oath of office, then he went to this party and went to that party, had a kind of performative signing with a few executive orders, then he went to another party, and then he cut a cake, then he danced at YMCA, whatever. And we were kind of watching this going, there's a lot to get done. I'm not sure why you're going to party after party after party here. And it was all the way to 2 a.m. Well, it turns out that all that was a diversion, because at that very same time, like within minutes after the inauguration, the team of DOGE went into the U.S. Treasury payment portals and got in there and started mapping U.S. Outgoing payments, and discovered that evening that about $4.7 trillion of existing payments were untagged with a source.
Right.
So, like, we don't know who ordered them or where they went or anything. This is how bad the accounting was. So they started rolling through this thing. And the headlines the next day were screaming, DOGE has entered the Treasury, DOGE has entered the Treasury, as if nothing like this had ever happened. And I thought, this is a little bit...
British are coming.
A little bit strange, like the hysteria on the part of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, but it's a little disproportionate in some way. Well, sure enough, a few days later, the New York Times runs an article by 5 former secretaries of Treasury. And what they say is no elected official or any outside appointed official in 80 years has accessed the outgoing payment systems of the U.S. Treasury. That's always been the province of a tiny group of dedicated civil servants from within the system. I'm reading this thinking, you're telling me that in 80 years, you've never had an outside audit. The Secretary of Treasury has always just been pretending. The President of the United States has never had access to the U.S. Treasury payment systems. I mean, this is outrageous. And they were upset that DOGE was doing this. And it just made me realize something extremely important, that in all of living memory, U.S. government has been operating the way the Bernie Madoff's firm operated, within secrecy, only a handful of people having access. There's this person named the Fiscal Assistant Secretary who runs the payment portals, and he's always been promoted from within the Treasury, always a career bureaucrat. And this has been true since 1939. There have been only 15 of them since 1939, all of them from the U.S. Treasury Department, nobody from the outside ever.
Right,
So
and they dummy up just enough. They dummy up the records and have just enough cash on hand to pay whoever must be paid right now to keep up this house of cards. The Madoff comparison is interesting.
We need to know, and but people need to understand. It's like the New York Morning runs a big article going, "Well, Musk is bringing techno-fascism to America." It's like, no, you don't understand what's going on here. They're trying to bring normal standards of from the private sector, normal standards of bookkeeping and transparent accounting to government. That's all they're doing. And it's never happened.
Jeffrey Tucker, we have to leave it there, but appreciate it as always. Jeffrey Tucker, founder and president of the Brownstone Institute, author of Liberty or Lockdown. Jeffrey Tucker, thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. And you joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer,